Resident Evil is dead. Long live Resident Evil. Wait, it's getting back up! Shoot it again! Yeah, as a piece of art birthed out of a larger corporate structure, there will inevitably be more sequels, spin-offs, and remakes. Though Resident Evil Requiem marketed itself as the end of the Raccoon City saga, which originated all the way back in 1996. By Capcom's account, this is the end. Unless the developers chicken out and start producing a bunch of prequels, the original cast is, at this point, starting to get way too old for this zombie-killing shit. Time will tell just how bold of a move Resident Evil Requiem is for the series. But as of right now, the pitch is deeply compelling, mainly because of how dependent every new Resident Evil game has been on its predecessors, more so than genre rival Silent Hill. More so than perhaps any other survival horror franchise, Resident Evil has never been able to fully break itself free from the series' design tendencies and increasingly convoluted lore. Even after revitalizing the Resident Evil name with the 7th mainline game, Capcom couldn't help themselves from more or less remaking Resident Evil 4 with the sequel, Village. After which they literally remade Resident Evil 4. With that in mind, the series can be best described as cyclical. A game will try to recapture the relatively simplistic survival horror of the original, only to gradually slide into a more action-oriented direction, and then finally revert back to the original formula once the series has strayed too far. That was my main concern with Resident Evil Requiem. Was this gonna be Resident Evil 6 all over again? An unfocused, bloated mess attempting the impossible task of appeasing all demographics? Or could Capcom restrain themselves this time, while also taking the series in a new direction, free of the baggage it's been dragging around for 30 years now? Would Requiem be the culmination of everything the series has done for the past 3 decades, the confident start of a new era? Or both? The word Requiem does refer to remembrance of the dead, through religious mass. But what would Capcom dare kill off to give us something to pay our respects to? We'll start as the game does, mostly separated from any previous Resident Evil game. Hardcore fans will quickly notice that the new protagonist, Grace Ashcroft, shares her last name with Alyssa Ashcroft, from the short-lived spin-off series Resident Evil Outbreak. Though her inexperience within the world of bioweapons is intended to mirror players who are equally unfamiliar with the franchise, she does provide a necessary reset for experienced players also. Ethan Winters, the protagonist of Resident Evil 7 and 8, grew from civilian to mold remediation specialist and werewolf killer by the time his story finished. And Resident Evil Requiem wants you to start off way less powerful than that. Grace is an FBI analyst who displays the same lack of confidence whether she's getting ready to fire a gun or trying to get a single sentence out. A gun is nevertheless thrust upon her once she has assigned fieldwork at a murder site. The same one where her mother Alyssa was murdered, 8 years prior. Almost as if someone is trying to lure Grace out specifically. This is quickly proven to be absolutely correct, as Grace is taken to the Rhodes Hill Chronic Care Center. Not as a patient, but a prisoner. A new protagonist, a new mystery, within a classic Resident Evil style setting. Grace is a standout among previous protagonists, not simply due to her lack of combat training. Prior to Village, Ethan didn't have much either, though that didn't stop him from picking up everything from shotguns to grenade launchers. Grace, on the other hand, has no access to such weaponry. During your first playthrough, she'll be able to acquire exactly 3 pistols, 2 of which are weak and close to interchangeable, while the third has such limited ammunition that you will likely want to save it for the most dangerous encounters. Her other weapons are primarily meant for defense and stealth. You've got glass bottles for distractions, a blood extractor to, among other things, create a one-use, one-hit kill syringe that can take out a zombie with a well-timed sneak attack, and a makeshift knife to fend off enemies who don't grasp the concept of non-consensual touching. Any other weapons and tools Grace comes across are less about empowering her than they give her ways of adapting to new threats. Resident Evil games have always required careful strategy, especially on harder difficulty levels. During my first playthrough of the Resident Evil 2 remake, I remember having vivid nightmares about not having enough ammo to reach the end. However, the thing about previous entries is that they follow a predictable curve where you gradually shift from hunted to hunter. You can, hypothetically, still be kind of shit at a Resident Evil game, yet persevere to the very end thanks to the heavy arsenal you've collected. In essence, your weapons level up, but it's not required that you do. Playing as Grace in Resident Evil Requiem, it's the other way around. There are items which increase the amount of damage she can take, or how stable her aim is, but the deciding factor is how you utilize the space around you, how well you read every situation, how to navigate them in a pinch. And the best part is, that dynamic never really changes for Grace. She never becomes the hunter. She's merely a survivor. The zombies also adapt to their predicament. Many of them retain a piece of who they were, what they were doing, before they turned. And it's up to you to take advantage and/or be extra cautious of those behaviors. One zombie, for example, is obsessed with keeping the ceiling lights off, so you can funnel him along by flicking nearby light switches. Another will scream at the top of her lungs to stun you if noticed, leaving you vulnerable to other nearby zombies. While these two will just hang out at the top of this staircase until you provoke them. Looking at those zombies, and all the others like them, I think about the 2025 film 28 Years Later, and its direct sequel. The Bone Temple, in particular, explores the humanity that still resides in the infected, how it can be drawn out through acts of compassion, and most importantly, how the living and the living dead are deserving of equal amounts of respect. Memento mori. Remember that you must die, that we all die, and that our bones all look the same underneath all the flesh and blood. Giving the zombies in Resident Evil Requiem individual personalities is impressive from a technical standpoint, but it's even more impressive as a means of evolving our relationship with Resident Evil as a zombie-killing franchise. In the past, you might have held off on straight-up ending the life of a zombie purely to preserve ammunition, a mostly tactical and selfish decision. Now you might do it because of empathy. Or hell, maybe you're more inclined to kill them, to end their suffering. You always knew, deep down, that enemies in the previous games used to be people, but it was easy to ignore most of the time because, look at them. But when you see the zombies in Requiem, see them perform their human tasks, hear them muttering actual words to themselves, giving you a glimpse of the person underneath, it's heartwarming and heartbreaking in equal measure. They fight for the same thing you do, for normalcy. Granted, it's not the first Resident Evil game that has attempted to humanize its enemies, but Requiem is the first to try to individualize them. At this scale, and especially during this portion of the game, it succeeds. Gloriously. Or should I say, gracefully? Wait, who the fuck are you? This empathetic depiction of the undead lends further weight to the game's setting, which in turn inspires yet further empathy. They aren't monsters inhabiting a spooky mansion, nor is this a plague spreading through a defenseless town. These are victims in need of care, stuck in a care center. You're inclined to take more pity on someone sitting in a hospital waiting room than someone sitting on a bus. You reflect on, even worry about the well-being of a complete stranger. But if they are here, regardless of how bad their situation is, that means there's hope. It should also be noted that this care center, at least initially, was a place for treating chronic ailments, which plays into one of Requiem's most central themes. Some wounds may never fully heal, but we can learn to live with them. Grace's wound is the death of her mother, So when she stumbles upon the cell of a blind orphan named Emily, it's understandable that Grace sees a part of herself in her. Though maybe most of all because she kind of looks like a younger version of herself. Grace, unfortunately, fails to save the girl, as she transforms into this ghastly thing. But Emily wasn't the only one. She was, in fact, a clone. Just like the towering stalker-type enemy simply known as the Girl, it's hinted that Emily is actually a clone of Grace, a product of the Umbrella Corporation. Turns out she's quite important to the history of the franchise after all. You could say that she has stronger ties to the Raccoon City incident than even our secondary protagonist. There's a reason why the zombie outbreak occurs at Rhodes Hill specifically. In the hands of the game's antagonist, Dr. Victor Gideon, this facility has become a place for bioorganic weapons research. His goal? To fulfill what he believes to be the final wish of Oswald Spencer, one of the founders of the Umbrella Corporation, the one who received the blame for the Raccoon City outbreak. Before he died, Spencer left something behind, something hidden, deep beneath the rubble, something he called Elpis. What Elpis is, or what Spencer intended to use it for, eludes Gideon. But in his blind devotion to Spencer, he plans to find and release it into the world, at any cost. This is where the game's secondary protagonist comes in. Good old Leon S. Kennedy. While he certainly wasn't the sole survivor of Raccoon City, he is the protagonist who most overtly expresses survivors' guilt. He was never turned by the zombie-making T-virus in his Resident Evil 2 debut, but he was infected with Las Plagas in Resident Evil 4. The impact of that plaga is literal and metaphorical. It's the manifestation of Leon's past coming back to haunt him, his fear of failing to save a life, like he failed to save so many back in Raccoon City. He ultimately does get rid of the plaga, but a part of that guilt still remains dormant within him. An open wound that continued to bleed over the subsequent decades. It's no wonder, then, that Leon's part of this story starts with the revelation that he did catch the T-virus all those years ago, and that it has finally begun to take him over. Finding the cure requires him to face his past one last time. Grace remains the hunted throughout Resident Evil Requiem, in large part because the hunter role is now reserved for Leon. Both characters traverse the care center, but where Grace struggles, Leon fucking steamrolls through. One of the first, albeit temporary weapons he acquires is a chainsaw, the very weapon that had Resident Evil 4 players cowering in fear during the iconic opening village fight. Despite pushing 50 years old, Leon is more efficient at his zombie-slaying job than ever, though it has also left him jaded. The first time he meets Claire Redfield, the second protagonist of Resident Evil 2, he commands her to duck so that he can put a bullet in the zombie behind her. In Requiem, he simply stands and watches as an infected doctor revs the aforementioned chainsaw and proceeds to cleave a non-infected nurse in two. Leon has become so desensitized to the violence around him, as well as the violence he himself commits, that he has potentially lost sight of why he's causing that violence in the first place. You get to choose your preferred camera perspective for each character, but Leon's sections default to a third-person camera. Relative to Grace's more intimate first-person view, Leon is detached from his own brutality. He viciously decapitates zombies with his new axe, stomps their heads in, and uses the game's titular revolver to blow their brains out. Way to pay respects to the dead. At the same time, the game does its damnedest to make those actions look cool. And they are. It's just that, while the primary intention of Leon's sections seemed to be to provide some catharsis after having struggled against these zombies as Grace, it feels wrong. She was able to get through them without causing this level of carnage. So why shouldn't Leon, with his lifetime of experience, be able to do the same? It may sound like I'm being negative about this, but that dissonance is actually what I find the most intriguing about the first half of the game. Grace shows us how the franchise could progress, while Leon proves why the old ways are not fully compatible with that vision. Grace's sections recontextualize not just Leon's actions in this game, but in all his previous ones. Like, yeah, maybe it wasn't all that tasteful to be cracking jokes while decimating the population of that Spanish village back in Resident Evil 4. They were monsters, but they were also people. They too displayed traces of their lost humanity. Killing them was the convenient option. Resident Evil Requiem has me wondering if it was the right one. Fans have made the joke that when Leon steps through the door, the zombies in Requiem ask themselves why they're suddenly hearing boss music. It's a good joke, but it also calls attention to the fact that Leon comes off as not just powerful, but maybe even a little bit evil. Bosses in video games don't tend to be the good guy, after all. It's when Leon finally revisits Raccoon City that I feel like the game drops the ball. This should be the moment when Leon comes to terms with his survivor's guilt, when he learns something from it. It succeeds in part, but it's undermined by one tiny little thing that distracted the hell out of me. Leon is not alone in the city. The counter-terrorism organization, BSAA, has set up camps all over, where they keep supply chests containing guns, and further, gun upgrades. To acquire them, Leon has to use a bracelet that collects combat data, converting it into points, which can then be used as store credit. For a seasoned Resident Evil player, this probably doesn't sound like anything new. You collected pesetas to barter with the village merchant in Resident Evil 4, for example. It works fine as a game mechanic, but it clashes heavily with the idea of Leon coming here to advance his redemptive character arc. Opening the doors to the Raccoon City Police Department, Leon's short-lived former workplace, is one of the most emotionally resonant moments of any Resident Evil game to date. After disposing one of the zombified officers, who miraculously managed to survive the missile strike decades prior, Leon solemnly wishes him a peaceful rest. Meanwhile, in the top right corner, you're informed that killing said officer has granted you 500 points. Yeah! Hell yeah! Get those points, Leon. Work through your trauma through gamification.
GTA, motherfucker! Oh, yeah! 10 points!
Paul W.S. Anderson was a prophet. It's not like there's a sense of satire about it, like the constantly visible kill counter in Capcom's other zombie series, Dead Rising. The bracelet does make sense as a critique of the militarized forces sent to dispose of the zombies. After all, it was the BSAA who brought these point-collecting bracelets, not Leon. But he benefits from them. You absolutely could toss that bracelet and not bother with the game's economy at all. But the game wants you, expects you, to engage with it. How else are you gonna have a fighting chance against the giant spiders and monster plants lurking the streets? The worst part of it, though, is that if you decide to replay the game, you'll have the bracelet in your inventory from the get-go. Meaning that it partially ruins not just the second part of the game, but all of Leon's sections, by retroactively rewarding his excessive brutality right from the start. The partial failure of utilizing Raccoon City as a motivator for Leon's introspection is somewhat overshadowed by the overall gameplay experience. I started this video by expressing my fear that Capcom hadn't learned from Resident Evil 6. That Requiem would crash and burn as a result of trying too many things to impress as many people as possible. As it turns out, Capcom did learn from Resident Evil 6, and then decided to try it again. And you know what? They kind of nailed it this time. Who would have thought that all it took to make Resident Evil 6 work was turning the number upside down? No, not again! In an interview with IGN, RE6 producer Yoshiaki Hirabayashi stated that their goal with the game was to deliver the ultimate horror entertainment. And what is Resident Evil Requiem, if not exactly that? All the familiar beats are here, sneaking around stalker-type enemies that will kill you in an instant, resource gathering and item crafting, puzzle solving, slow one-on-one enemy encounters, and explosive set pieces. It has a throwaway section solely dedicated to shooting glass underneath your enemies' feet to make them fall to their deaths, and another where you use a sniper rifle to provide cover fire. You blow up brains, a laboratory, even an underground mega facility. Resident Evil Requiem is a game that veers from the darkest depths in the most unnerving silence to you ascending the outside of a skyscraper on a motorcycle. It has most of, if not everything, you'd expect from a survival horror game, leaning towards the action side of the spectrum. And unlike Resident Evil 6, it never tries to compromise the franchise's identity to achieve that goal. Resident Evil Requiem is not a game for everyone. It's a game for those who love horror games, who love Resident Evil, and those who end up smitten enough to explore the series further. Though maybe Ultimate Horror Entertainment is not as appropriate a label as Greatest Hits album. I hate to make the Star Wars comparison in the year of our Lord 2026, mostly because I bemoan anyone who is still unable to let go of their loathing of what that franchise became post-sequel trilogy. But Resident Evil Requiem kind of is the sequel trilogy of Resident Evil games, with its almost absurdly frequent callbacks to past events. We got the T-Virus from the original game, Blisterheads, clearly inspired by the remake's Crimson Heads, Raccoon City from Resident Evil 2, with Lickers and Mr. X making an appearance. We have Sherry Birkin from Resident Evil 2, filling in for RE4's Ingrid Hunnigan as Leon's handler. Hunk, the Boba Fett of the series, shows up to provide two references in one. A character from Resident Evil 2, reenacting the most famous close quarters fight from Resident Evil 4. Nemesis' final form returns from Resident Evil 3. Leon is infected with a virus like in Resident Evil 4. Even the way he holds his gun is taken from that game. He fights an enemy tossing spores around in a church like in Resident Evil 6. There are zombies with guns like in Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6. Somehow Wesker returned! It all makes for a very self-indulgent story. One that bends over backwards to try and make all of its disparate pieces fit. Which brings us to the truth of Resident Evil, that Requiem exposes like no entry before it. Yeah, hello?
Too much.
Pardon?
I have too much money.
Doesn't sound like much of a problem to me.
They will take me.
Who?
The Soul Claimers. They have my number. I must spend money.
Well, that does sound like a problem. Have you ever thought about, I don't know, giving some away?
Give
Yeah. I mean, for example, I have this Patreon.
Patreon.
Yeah, it's what keeps my YouTube channel going. And you don't even have to donate that much. Just $1 a month will give you access to, like, behind-the-scenes stuff, podcasts, my Discord server, movie nights. You also get access to all my videos earlier than everyone else.
So you are Treon?
No, I make videos.
What are these videos?
Horror stuff, mostly.
I think I'm getting enough horror at present.
Look, do you want those soul claimers off your back or no?
Do not say their name.
But you just did... Look, are you in or not?
Oh, I shall drown you in money.
You mean metaphorically, right? Hello?
Welcome to the family, son.
There are three elements that define the soap opera. First, the ensemble cast, often playing a familial bunch, butting heads over interpersonal relationships, and broad contemporary issues. Second is melodrama. The characters are exaggerated, and their circumstances even more so. Third, sentimentality. It's thoroughly hooked on its own nostalgia, high on its own supply, so to speak. Soap operas are also known for going on for ages, and the longer they go, the harder it gets to maintain a cohesive continuity and tone. which has given us such classic genre moments like the entire 9th season of Dallas being a dream, and the demon possession storyline in Days of Our Lives in 1994, nearly 30 years into the show's run. Isn't it ironic that I'm talking about Resident Evil, and the further you get into the video, the more I literally get sick? I don't believe something has to start with these genre tropes to eventually turn into a soap opera. I believe that's what happens when a franchise has gone on long enough for all its baggage to make that transition inevitable. Especially in our current times, where media companies have figured out that catering to nostalgia makes a killing. Sometimes. Resident Evil, as a franchise, turned 30 years old this year. It was already exhibiting melodrama back in 1996. Since then, we've had the same reoccurring characters taking on a guy who controls leeches by singing to them, a rapidly aging mold woman who projects a younger version of herself to be taken care of by the family she never had, a man who saw The Matrix once and made it his whole identity, and another man who wanted to bone someone so badly he turned his assistant into a clone of her, who then proceeded to cause the biggest global bioweapon outbreak of all time. There have been zombies, tentacle monsters, giant snakes, a dinosaur, vampires, werewolves, and Magneto. We've had government cover-ups and conspiracies, family feuds and family trauma. We've had a game that basically would not have happened had one of the characters just told the protagonist what their plans were. Sometimes the heroes are allies, sometimes they're enemies, and sometimes Jack Baker just wants his fucking birthday cake! Resident Evil 6 is actually more emblematic of the series as a whole than I think people give it credit for, than I have given it credit for. The main criticism against the game can be boiled down to there having been too many cooks in the kitchen. Too many people, too many ideas, few of which feel like they fit together. I agree with that. But when it comes to the story of Resident Evil, hasn't that always been true? Even in the post-revival era, Capcom doesn't really seem to have a plan for where things are supposed to go. Things are introduced and then dropped. Characters are repeatedly introduced and dropped. Things aren't built upon. They're retconned. Oh no, actually, Oswald Spencer found the progenitor virus thanks to the villain of Resident Evil Village. You just never heard about her before. Also, it doesn't change anything, apart from diluting the series' already convoluted lore. Resident Evil Requiem stands in one of the most awkward positions of any Resident Evil game in this regard. It is officially the 9th entry in the mainline series. It merely hides the number behind the letter Q. But it doesn't take the events of the original Resident Evil 2, 3, or 4 into account. It's based on the continuity created within their respective remakes. You could, arguably, play the originals and still perfectly understand what's going on in Requiem. But that doesn't seem to be the way Capcom wants you to do it, because by the end of the original Resident Evil 3, Raccoon City literally doesn't exist anymore. It is explicitly shown, in extreme detail, that each and every building, man, woman, NB, child, and zombie, is completely blown to shit. However, the remake of 3 leaves the level of destruction clouded. Literally. We're currently at a phase in the franchise's existence where anything can be rewritten at any given moment. At the time of recording, the 2009 version of Resident Evil 5 is very much canon, but that will change the second Capcom decides to remake it, which, in turn, might recontextualize the entire series. This leads us to one of the most bewildering retcons of all, Oswald Spencer himself. Even the Resident Evil wiki describes him as a cold and ruthless elitist, who means to mold a utopia for mankind with himself as the ruler, which he alludes to in his final moments, as he points out the irony of someone who has the right to be a god, having to face his own mortality. But then, in Resident Evil Requiem, it's revealed that Spencer spent his last days regretting his life's work, that he created Elpis as a means of righting all the wrongs Umbrella had caused under his rule. This Oswald Spencer simply can't be the same guy he was right before his death in Resident Evil 5. He was a cold-blooded eugenicist to his very bloody end. Yet in Requiem we're supposed to believe that he had a sudden change of heart? I personally don't buy a Thermian argument like, he was just putting on a show to provoke Wesker to kill him, because it's so transparently a retcon for the sake of telling the story Capcom wanted to tell, rather than one that fits within the already established canon. Not that breaking canon is inherently a bad thing, but therein lies my point. The plot of the Resident Evil series, and I'm saying this as affectionately as I possibly can, is complete bollocks. Note that I'm not saying that the themes explored are bollocks, but the plots have only gotten more bollocks as the franchise has bollocked on. And therein lies the humanity of Resident Evil. It was predestined to become a campy soap opera. And soap operas exist because humans do. They're popular because they reflect what real people actually feel, or at the very least relate to. To quote George Weidman of Super Bunny Hop fame in his excellent video on Metal Gear Solid 3, to enjoy something for being campy is to love human nature. Resident Evil Requiem is as campy and soap opera-y as a Resident Evil game has ever been. Yet I can't deny for a second that I wasn't moved by its attempts at creating lasting emotional moments. Watching Grace lose not one, but 3 people she cares about hit me like a punch in the gut. Seeing the Raccoon City Police Department again did make me sentimental, which is the only police department that will ever make me feel that way. And the looming threat of Leon succumbing to his T-virus infection haunted me before I ever even touched the game. Again, the game is called Requiem. What if Capcom were serious about cementing the game as the end of the series' status quo? What if the thing they were gonna kill off was one of its most iconic characters? Resident Evil has had one official ending once before, in a different medium. Paul W.S. Anderson's film series saw its final chapter released in 2016. And if I wasn't sure that Capcom took a real hard look at Anderson's homework, I would have said that the similarities are uncanny. We got the return to a post-missile strike Raccoon City, bathed in the same sepia tones, the ultimate antiviral to rid the world of all zombies, needlessly numerous clones. I'm by no means saying that the films are perfect adaptations of the games. Retribution did Leon so dirty that no washing machine in the world could possibly remove the stains. But it sure says a lot about those films when Capcom themselves use them as inspiration when wrapping up their own version of the Raccoon City saga. The critical difference is that Resident Evil, the final chapter, has one definitive ending. Requiem has 2. Throughout the game, Dr. Gideon, as well as Zeno, the clone of Albert Wesker, has been feeding Grace the idea that she is special, that she is the key to unlocking Elpis. When Grace reaches the Ark laboratory underneath Raccoon City, a computer terminal reveals that, yes, she does have a connection to Oswald Spencer, though not the kind Gideon nor Zeno assumed. Here, Star Wars rears its head once more, because just like Rey by the end of The Last Jedi, it turns out that Grace was a completely normal child, whom Spencer found and took care of to make amends for his crimes against humanity. Whoever saves one life saves the world entire, as the Jewish Talmud says. Alyssa Ashcroft just so happened to be the person available to take over as Spencer approached his mortal end, and by doing so, she carried on Spencer's hope, his Elpis. Maybe Gideon and Zeno's plan would have looked differently had they known basic Greek mythology. Maybe then they would have realized what they were trying to release into the world was actually hope. Not that it's their choice to make, it's yours. Release or destroy. The irony is that the bad guys' plan, unbeknownst to them, involves releasing the antiviral, while Leon, who assumes Elpis to be bad news, asks Grace to destroy it. And of course that's what he wants. He has spent the whole game destroying everything that poses a problem. That's how he has spent his whole, well, problem-solving career. He escalates conflict, where he should be de-escalating it. And if you take his misguided advice, Leon is the one who suffers the consequences most of all. That's right, Leon S. Kennedy dies, shot in the head by the clone of Albert Wesker. In his final moment, he turns to Grace and says, "At least I could save you." Whoever saves one life, saves the world entire. Zeno pulls the trigger, but it's ultimately Leon's own survivor's guilt that finally consumes him. Even at the end, he is still obsessed with those he did and didn't save. Yet he would not have ended up like this had he cared as much about how to save someone. He did manage to save Grace, as he saved fellow young blondes Sherry Birkin and Ashley Graham in Resident Evil 2 and 4 respectively. But what about that woman at the care center, whom he watched get poked by a chainsaw? What about all the zombies? If there was a chance of there being a cure for him, surely one could exist for them too. And yeah, turns out it did. Grace, meanwhile, leaves Raccoon City just like Leon did 3 decades earlier, lamenting someone she couldn't save. His survivor's guilt is now hers, and unless she learns from Leon's demise, it will, eventually, take her too. One of the 2 endings will eventually end up being chosen by Capcom as canon. How else could any Resident Evil games possibly take place following the events of Requiem, unless every single character in the RE-verse agrees to never mention Leon's name again? And let's face it, if they're picking one ending, it's not gonna be the one where Leon dies. At this point, Capcom has perfected the art of having its cake and eating it too. Jill Valentine is dead, except she isn't. Ada Wong is a bad guy now. Except she's a clone. Chris Redfield is a bad guy now. Except it's actually Ethan's imposter wife who's the bad guy. Capcom loves to suggest radical change, while never daring to fully deliver on it. How could they? Resident Evil Requiem sold 5 million copies in less than a week. The S in Leon S. Kennedy might as well stand for stocks. Grace Benfell wrote a piece for the AV Club, where she touches upon Requiem's risk avoidance, pointing out that, for all its faults, a film like Return to Silent Hill is more interesting because it has the courage to commit blasphemy, the courage to make something in meaningful conversation with the game it was based on without feeling beholden to it. And as blasphemous as it might feel to witness the canonical end of Leon, and as much as I would find that bold and intriguing, I find what makes the real ending so compelling is that it dares to be so hopeful. If Grace chooses to release Elpis, Leon lives, and Gideon and Zeno die. The day is saved, but there was somebody else Grace wished she could have saved as well. Emily. Somewhere back at the care center, she still roams as a terrifying monster. But then, Leon suggests that maybe there is still a chance to save her. Elpis didn't just cure him of the T-virus, it returned his sense of hope. And as it turns out, Emily is saved. Just like how Oswald took her in as a child, Grace takes Emily under her wing. The wound of her lost mother is still there, but with a new family, a new friend in Leon, she begins the process of moving on. Sure, Elpis isn't going to change the world overnight, if it can even be replicated at all. The Illuminati-like society known as the Connections, who were actually behind the destruction of Raccoon City all along, is still out there. But just this once, the world of Resident Evil feels a little warmer. I keep coming back to that quote from the Talmud, "Whoever saves one life saves the world entire." In a way, I think it summarizes Resident Evil Requiem better than I ever could. In a literal sense, it's how Spencer rationalized taking care of Grace. But in the more, I suppose, intentionally metaphorical sense, the quote is about how people are also worlds in and of themselves. We are worlds populated by memories, experiences, opinions, and relationships. Sometimes worlds intersect, collide, expanding or creating entirely new ones. Resident Evil Requiem contains several different worlds. And what I find the most beautiful about Requiem, as a Resident Evil game, is that it raises the idea of fighting for these worlds, rather than destroying them. Resident Evil was not the first survival horror game. but it was the game to coin the term, or at least the Japanese box art did. And like a comedian doing a parodic impersonation, the game emphasized the qualities of its spiritual predecessors to the point where it embodied them more completely than anything that had come before. I believe this is why the franchise is still around. Even with its attempts at reinvention and occasional missteps, Resident Evil has remained the survival horror game series. Not necessarily the best one, but the one. The way Doom is the first-person shooter. The way Rogue and Dark Souls had entire subgenres named after them. Resident Evil Requiem is not just a reminder of where the franchise has been, a proof of concept for where it could potentially go, but a summary of why the name Resident Evil still matters. Requiem is the end of the Raccoon City saga, but not the end of Resident Evil. There's a chance it will never end. And personally, I don't think I want it to. That's not in spite of all the things I've been criticizing about the franchise, but because of them. Resident Evil is one of my all-time favorite soap operas. Or to quote Scottish comedian and artist Billy Connolly, it's just a load of old bollocks. And it pleases me greatly. And as the closest thing to an ending this franchise might ever get, Requiem reflects the artistic maturity and confidence that comes with 30 years of experience, while simultaneously retaining all the absurdity you'd come to expect. It has been satisfying to witness the growth of this series, from the zombies being truly mindless to becoming proper characters of their own. It brings attention to the question that all great zombie media asks. What is truly the difference between us and them? How do they reflect us and the current state of the world? Resident Evil Requiem shares its answer with 28 Years Later and The Bone Temple, albeit with clumsier delivery. The world we live in is full of rage, and some of that rage can be beaten through compassion rather than aggression. Hope rather than despair. Requiem posits that even those who seem to be the most lost can still be saved. And yeah, maybe not Grace, but Leon will certainly keep on killing zombies like he always have whenever Capcom decides to bring him back. Which they will, but at least we've gotten a full character arc out of him. One that stands on its own, regardless of what comes next. Raccoon City is the most thoroughly explored location of any Resident Evil game. We have seen it through the eyes of Grace Ashcroft, Leon S. Kennedy, Claire Redfield, Sherry Birkin, Hunk, Jill Valentine, Carlos Oliveira, the whole cast of the Outbreak games, a band of umbrella mercenaries, even a sentient piece of tofu. We've seen it through every possible camera angle, both before and after its ultimate destruction. But now, finally, Resident Evil can take the step beyond the city limits. Look beyond like its genre rival Silent Hill eventually did. The effects of the Raccoon City outbreak will still be felt decades down the line, as it has the past 3. But wherever all these characters go in the future, they'll be moving forward with hope in their hearts. As should we. So rest in peace, Raccoon City. You have earned it. No, wait, it's getting back up again! Thank you all so much for watching, and a special thanks to all who are keeping this shambling corpse of a YouTube channel alive through your monthly donations on Patreon. Here are some of them. 12p! Onaday, Callum Wally, Chromatophorium, Eben Phantom, Emmeline, Eric Hamilton Schneider, Evil A. Chance, Ovard Krugerud, Icarus Harker, Jesse Earl, Kalis, Labis, Losty, Nicole, Rosa Roro, Rowan Woodcock, Sable Cal, Sethsard, TV Skyan, The Fluff, The Sphere Hunter, and Vinders. I also want to thank Hot Cider for the thumbnail, Zoe Wolf for the glitch art, Hamish of Writing on Games and Jamie Wallace for editing the script, and Mira Cox for providing the voice of the ominous phone caller. You'll find all their links in the video description. Since this video is in part a celebration of Resident Evil, I figured I would recommend some other great essays on the franchise. But you don't need me to tell you that Monty Zander's Resident Evil retrospectives are goated, that the Sphere Hunters retrospectives are goated, nor Gervais, RagnarRox, all goated. I'll still leave some video recommendations from their channels in the description, but I do want to highlight two essayists who have received a similar amount of attention, or less, than I have, who deserve way more. So if you prefer short-form essays, Lord Iroh has you covered with their charisma, humor, and, above all, accuracy. If you prefer long-form essays, there's a video called Every Resident Evil's First Zombie, Ranked and Remembered, by Mason Miller. Make no mistake, this is no simple ranking video. This might actually be my favorite Resident Evil analysis I've ever watched, and that says a fucking lot given the competition. It's not just a great commentary on the evolution of the franchise, but an introspective analysis of a fan coming to terms with times gone by. It is an absolute crime that more people have not seen this essay. It should have views in the millions, but if I can't make that happen, maybe all of you will. Now, some of you might still be thinking, why the hell didn't Claire Redfield show up in this game? Or Jill Valentine? Now, as much as I would have loved to see them, and as much as they deserve to be brought back to the mainline Resident Evil series, the answer is quite simple. They went to therapy instead.
Well, anyway, I think that pretty much wraps up this episode of Let's Catch People Eating Cake. What a waste of everyone's time. Get back to the show. Enjoy.